Human perception is a fairly important thing to our understanding of anything around us, but you have to realize we are perceiving everything through meat and fat. Our entire existence hinges on neurons reporting information correctly and our brains being able to even interpret what we are seeing in the first place. If we have never seen it before, there is a good chance that our brains would not even know where to begin to process it. One of my favorite examples of this is a man who had his vision restored in his, I think it was like late 30s, early 40s. Basically, even though he could see, his brain didn't know how to interpret what he was seeing because he had never seen before. So everything was just kind of overwhelming and super bright. Even though technically he knew he was seeing, his brain still didn't really know where to begin concerning what he was seeing. And this is where the idea of are we really the sum of our parts is kind of stemming from. We are all aware of the limitations of our brains and bodies, and we have a clear understanding of the finality of it all, and yet, even with the brains that know it is limited, it can understand the barriers that it has and even wants more beyond that. Human consciousness in particular is quite strange as a result, and many people over the years have tried to explain why we are the way we are. And to some extent, this can satiate a lot of people, but even in the back of their head and the people who are satiated, it still likely doesn't feel like enough information. Like there is some piece we are missing that continues to gnaw at us as if the question is unanswered to its fullest extent. This perception issue leaves us wanting more out of our own bodies, and our limitations have never been more highlighted than in today's episode. As a meteor falls from space, landing on a family farm, animals begin acting strangely, and a bright, indescribable color can be seen filtering into the home and affecting the plant life. Unsure of what this even is, everyone continues on as normal, but there is a clear consequence cropping up. Mutations begin to arise within some, and in others, illness appears to be spreading, but still even in others, there's issues of hallucinations. But is it a trick of the mind or an attempt to grasp at something extra dimensional? And to that end, why does the human brain have such a problem processing this information in the first place? Well, let's discuss all of that in today's episode covering the color out of space. But first, this episode is sponsored by Factor. Factor takes the stress out of meal planning by delivering fresh, never frozen meals directly to you. With summer coming up, we all want to walk around and be healthy and active because not only do you look good, but you feel good as well. By eating healthy, this is foundational to a healthier life. With over 35 options such as Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, Vegan, Veggie, there is a meal plan for pretty much everyone. And right now, if you head to Factor75.com and use code 50Roanoke, you can get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. I've been eating Factor for a few years now, and I've dropped over 30 pounds. Not to mention because of the extra protein option, because protein is goated, I was able to knock out 410 pounds on chest press the other day for like 8 reps. Training is important, but filling your body with nutritious meals is equally important. And with them only taking 2 minutes to heat up, you can skip the takeout and enjoy a nutritious meal instead. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, then by heading to Factor75.com and using code 50Roanoke, you can get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. All right, let's get back to it. But before moving on, I want to thank you guys for watching. I'm attempting to hit 1.25 million subs in 2025, so if you want to help towards that goal, that would be great. Also, without you guys, none of this would even be possible, so I do appreciate your support. Check out Roanoke Tales, where it's like we talk about cryptids and true crimes and all that random nonsense. Now, it's basically an amalgamation of anything that I find interesting, and also check out the Discord for movies that we watch that then end up here. Links for both in the description. We kick off our story with this being a Nick Cage movie, so you know it's about to be absolutely cracked out.
Ready for the big ride, baby! Not the beast! Ah!
As we look up at some trees, a man starts talking about trees and valleys and birds and bees, you know, typical nature stuff. The man continues on about how, like, this place was assumed to be evil when the water was surveyed. They said the same thing about Arkham because the place was old. He didn't believe it. That is until he saw the crystal chick down by the water doing a ritual. It only gets worse from here. So as she continues with this ritual with a triangle on her head, the entire movie, I could not figure out if this girl was supposed to be 16 going on 60 or what the deal was. As a man wearing a Miskatonic University shirt walks up, the girl is doing a rain dance to get rid of the cancer in her mother. Cancer is a biological douche. That much I know for sure. She starts talking about being granted freedom and to be gotten out of there. And I mean, why don't you just give it a few years and you can go to college? Or, I mean, maybe you could go now. How old exactly are you? So sneaking up on her, his name is Ward Phillips. He's there to survey the valley. Evidently, he ruined the ritual. Gal, that ritual was ruined the second you put on a cloak. He then asks her if it was Wiccan or Alexandria. She's also got a pentagram on her foot. Okay then. So she rides off into the woods back towards home as we get some shots of a dog and alpacas. Well, Now that I know there's alpacas out back, this is definitely movie of the year. Nick sits on the porch reminiscing about the time he stole the Declaration of Independence, as then he scolds his daughter for not wearing a helmet or her shoes. He tells her to put the horse back into the barn before the mom figures it out, as the mom then exits the front door, having figured it out pretty much immediately. He then asks about where her brother is. What do I look like, my brother's keeper? Heading into the barn, bro is absolutely blazing the zaza, as the kids like to say. Of course, this is one of those families where there's really no enforcement of rules or consequences for breaking them, so everyone's just sort of doing what they want, which no structure is really good for teenagers, I hear. So Lavinia, or as I will be referring to her as, Miss Bedrot, tells her brother about the guy that she met down by the river. She's into him, which, you're like 15, I think. Hell, you could be 47 for all I know. So either this is really bad or normal. I'm gonna go with really bad. So she walks over to her other brother, Jack, as then he drops leaves down the well. Sitting down for dinner, Jack then talks about missing mom's pancakes as they go to eat a traditional French dish touted by Nick Cage. They talk about eating fast food, but this is duck, and duck, while a little greasy, is pretty good in my opinion. Upstairs in the creepy triangle attic, the mom is currently working. Why she would choose to work up there is beyond me. I mean, they didn't just move here. You could have put a lamp with an extension cord up there or something. And then talk about investing as she ends the call and heads downstairs. The internet is screwing up as she complains about the dish. Bedrot then talks about how McDonald's tastes like heaven, which new sensitivity just dropped in me actually. McDonald's gives me migraines now. Truly, we are in dark times. Of course, losing weight increases food sensitivity when you don't eat like crap all the time, so really it's my fault. I held on too tight and lost the edge. Of course, that also brings up the question, if it didn't give me migraines prior and my body was just sort of ignoring the absolute slop I was consuming, how good could that have been to me? So head to factor75.com/. Nick then heads down into the cellar to grab some wine, which is the American dream right there. Nick then tells the offspring it's time to do the dishes. He then heads outside with his wife as they talk about how they are becoming their parents. You know, maybe it's probably because your parents are the way they are due to similar circumstances that you will endure as well. I become my old man, it's really not that bad. The dude knows what's up at least a solid 73% of the time. So Nick is trying to get frisky and she doesn't know how he can still be interested in her, which I'm guessing she probably has ovarian cancer, might cause a bit of a shakeup in the confidence department. They're evidently living the dream, as some would claim. I would claim it anyhow. So we get this chef's kiss of a statement, right? Nick, I'm 100% sure he starts ad-libbing this as he claims, the dream you dream alone is a dream. The dream you dream together is reality. What? So as Miss Bedrot here sleeps next to random food everywhere, her brother plays some game with the phrase "no flesh shall be spared" above his computer. The absolute edge. Nick keeps trying to play hide the banana as then she's crying, which is not a good sign to proceed, as Jack is sitting under a pterosaur as their dog keeps whining. I know, someone's gonna be like, actually Roanoke, I'm having fun. Let me name it something cooler. So everything then starts to shake as the color on the screen changes. The pterosaur keeps pterosauring as Nick and Teresa start going at it. Oh man, it's like the whole ground is shaking. Miss Bedrot is entering REM sleep as a halo of light appears above the farm. Jack then heads out to go talk to his parents because he's freaking out as Sam ain't feeling great about the current set of events. An eerie pink light appears which allegedly is supposed to be imperceptible, but here I am, boldly perceiving it. I'm just built different. Sam then starts losing it as the alpacas are continuing to exist as alpaca. The light begins to flicker as High Times is zoned out drooling, and that's not even due to like an eldritch being. He just took a bad puff. Jack is spazzing out as outside a boom is heard, causing him to start screaming as everyone comes out to see what the problem is. So outside, Sam is already out there looking at the meteor. You know, fun fact, dogs typically have so much fun during filming that they have to digitally remove the tails wagging, which I think kind of causes a blur effect, and you can almost see it here. Nick then says the meteor smells, as Jack is not responding all that well. And this movie is tinnitus incarnate, by the way. You can't hear it, but holy Lord, I can. Nick then keeps talking about turds wafting through the air as Miss Bedrot says maybe the meteor is an alien plague. Jack then talks about his head hurting as Nick starts drinking. What a time to do so, brother. So to quantify initial symptoms, it appears at first to be highly neurological. The smell issue, as we will see, is the olfactory bulb being affected in some capacity, but there is more to it. If you are not aware, the reason smell actually works so well to trigger memories is that information is sent to the limbic system. Here, it can control emotion and memory. Being that the amygdala and hippocampus are involved heavily, again, because of the limbic system, if something smells bad enough, this can trigger frustration And if it smells like your great grandma's perfume, you may have memories of her pop up. So in this case, Nick is smelling the cancer ward that his father was in, and this triggers frustration and a desire to escape the smell, as clearly this would be associated with bad memories. Now, as for Bedrot and the other younglings, they appear to be having a ringing noise in their ears, which would indicate to a degree the temporal lobe is being affected by the introduction of some foreign element. We will see evidence for this later, for what this could be, which I will address the novel. Someone wrote me in the comments about it prior. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna address it now. This guy freaked out and basically stated that MRI machines do not cause hallucinations in the brain and they use electromagnetism, which is correct because basically what it's just me in here, what I was basing the concept on, I forget which episode it was, but essentially it was the Lovecraftian parasite, that's right. So essentially how the brain operates is with an electromagnetic field as well, and if there are certain wavelengths of electromagnetism, then it actually is known to affect the neurological firing of the brain because it can inhibit certain ions from passing through the cellular membrane. So the novel you wrote me, brother, was completely wrong, and while the MRI machine may not actually affect the electromagnetism of the brain, it is known that electromagnetism can affect the brain, which if you are disrupting neuronal firing, this can induce hallucinations. So get dunked on, take the L, we're moving on. I really wouldn't have had a problem with it if you just weren't so boldly wrong. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm boldly wrong in this channel all the time, but I figured I would address that in case that dude is still watching, and now we know where we are. Anyways, we're gonna move on. But just to understand for now, the brain of the individual is being affected by the meteor's presence, which is causing misfirings of the neurons, at least initially, leading to the consequences of sound and smell. But again, it could also be the creature that is contained within, and we may see evidence for this later on. So the next day, the sheriff comes out along with the mayor for some reason, as Nick is struggling with the farting rock apparently. They don't smell anything though, which means old KG here is the only one picking up the scent. Benny then warns the sheriff that it's hot. The smoke may have indicated that already, brother, but I'm pretty sure he appreciates the heads up. Bedrot comes out seeing Ward, as then she asks if he was looking at her legs, which, brother, she's like 14 or 85, so either way, it's a no-go. So she brings him over to the meteorite because it had the right stuff to make it to the ground, as Nick asks if there is a doctor as his son isn't feeling well, which, you didn't look that up? Why are you asking the mayor? Nick then tells Bedrot to go back inside, probably not jazzed about his 15 to 98-year-old daughter talking to a full-grown man, or maybe he is excited, maybe she's older. Anyways, this joke has run its course, so Bedrot then heads inside as Teresa basically tells her she is throwing herself at him and look how she's dressed. Ward then says meteorites are no more dangerous than other rocks, which it really depends on what that rock is made of. It could just be straight up plutonium, which that may cause a few issues, as then Nick gets up to go milk alpacas at this point, asking if Ward wants to come along. Nick then talks about being gentle with the memories. Definitely didn't need to hear an entire explanation from Nick Cage talk about that. So he drinks unpasteurized milk and immediately gets a bacterial infection, killing him instantly. Bedrot is upstairs crying over what her mom said, which I really don't know why. Mainly because I was never a teenage girl in my life, but I'm sure that was devastating somehow. The worst I ever got was my dad asking why I was wearing tank tops as a teen, which, my brother in Christ, it was to attract the women, or at least that's what I assumed it did. I'm a little older now. No idea if it does. I was still kind of figuring all that back out then, still figuring it out now. That said, I didn't really feel the need to cry over it. I just figured my dad was a nerd who didn't understand the game. So Benny now takes Ward over to the resident squatter's house, Ezra. It's Tommy Chong. Man, talk about being typecasted. So blazing the chronic, Tommy has a Professor Furface of his own, as Tommy then gives him coffee, and it has stuff floating at the top, which means I would not be drinking that crap. Tommy then says the water has gone brackish, which means it's salty, which means I would not be drinking that crap. As Ward says, well, it shouldn't appear that way this time of year, as Ward says he can run a test, and in the middle of saying that, a thunderstorm starts moving in. So they just sort of let Benny hang out with this guy, which is kind of interesting. Bedrot then heads outside into the storm as they notice the lightning is striking the meteor, which you know how insanely loud that is? Let's find out. It is stated that a lightning strike can actually reach around 165 to 180 decibels. Some have exceeded 200 decibels. That is quite literally a gunshot or a rocket launch, both of which are not only painful to hear, but can damage your hearing as a result. There is no shot they'd be standing there like, wow, it's so beautiful, let's get close. Nah, you'd be covering your ears and running inside. That is the natural response. So Ward then runs his test and determines, yep, there's an issue with the water, as then it turns neon pink. So the storm moves on as Ward then sits outside of his tent, which, yo, is that a 60 series Land Cruiser? Bro, so I've got the 80s series, which it's not really an 80s series, it's just rebadged to an LX 450 that gets a blazing 12 miles per gallon. So the Tacoma just gets driven much more than the LX for that reason. Granted, I will be putting a 4.7 Tundra engine in it, I think around June, as the power I have currently is abysmal. I was going up a hill and it did a maximum of 35 miles per hour floored, which I know, why not LS swap it? So Toyota reliability comes from the fact that no one part is under too much strain from the engine or transmission, and when you LS swap these things, they end up snapping parts, like if they catch a rock when you're like off-roading or anything due to the torque produced. So either way, the 60 series though is absolutely goated with its 4.2 liter inline 6 engine. You really cannot kill these things, and again, because they only had like 135 horsepower and were big and heavy, you wouldn't be winning any races, but they would get you where you needed to go eventually. So as his radio spazzes out, he then gets a call. Answering it, it's nothing but static as he hears a voice somewhat, as then he hears a twig snap. Going to check it out, with the worst flashlight ever, it's like 4 lumens, he sees a shimmering light everywhere, which cannot be good, and not good it is, as I have a conspiracy theory about this, which isn't really a conspiracy theory, I think it's the creature. See, here's the issue that we will see. In several instances, the light is seen, and yet the creature is never seen itself. However, clearly, it is having a physical impact on the world, and by the twig snapping, that implies there is physical weight to whatever is in the area, but humanity cannot actually perceive it, which I will also explain why this is the case later, and it really has to do with it being in the past and the future, but not necessarily in the present, meaning you can never really see it and process it at any particular point in time. There is another instance where the floorboards can be heard creaking under its weight, or at least something applying weight to them. Essentially, what the light is the form that we can somewhat perceive as light is refracted off of it and scattered, but we can never truly visualize the creature. Now, the question remains, is this because of light simply being bent around it, sort of like trying to observe a black hole directly, or is it because of something else? As stated, I believe it to be something else entirely, but we will get there momentarily. So I believe, just as to kind of wrap up this point, is you're like a sphere of sorts. This creature has an area of effect all around it that we will see, and because of this, as long as you remain within a certain distance of it, you are affected much like any and all other life. So what are these effects? They'll strap in, because we're about to see here a little later on, and best I can say is meat amalgamation. But anyhow, the lights of the Land Cruiser then turn on as the engine turns over and revs. The radio comes back on, freaking Ward out, as then it just sort of shuts off as evidently the creature moves out of the area, losing interest in Ward. Jumping forward, it is now the next day. A gecko appears by the well, just sort of vibing out, as the meteor has completely sunk into the earth. Nick and Teresa look at the empty hole, as then they spot a flower near the well that nobody had planted. A dream is only a dream of flowers if you never dreamed the planted flowers. Yeah, that'll stick. The media then shows up, oh thank God, as they conduct an interview. That night, Nick Cage then looks like a typical Nick Cage. Teresa's cutting vegetables and breaking eggs, and one of them appears to have a zygote, meaning that it should have been fertilized. Nick continues crashing out over his interview hardcore as Teresa then cuts off 2 of her fingers. Jack goes to check on her as he gets sprayed with blood and then freaks out. Teresa then holds up her hand saying, "Dinner is ready," which, what do you mean? You just broke a few eggs and cut a carrot. That's not dinner. So now we're starting to see the results of prolonged exposure to this creature, and it's not good as it could severely impact the standard arrangement of most animals and what they have with their bodies. Indirect exposure to this creature appears to induce cellular mitosis on a level beyond what would be considered normal or even possible. When we look at the egg, we know, because you've been watching this channel for long enough, that this is a single cell. In fact, the largest single cell in the world is an ostrich egg. Because the egg is a gametes, this would make it a haploid cell. Haploid cells have half the DNA required to continue on forming into a functional animal and require fertilization, which means a sperm and an egg combining to create the actual animal. With eggs, this process ceases continuation at what is known as meiosis 1. This arrested meiotic cell division process happens as the egg is supposed to stay as one single egg cell. Now, you may be wondering how twins are born. Well, at least maternal twins. This is when embryos themselves actually separate after fertilization. The haploid egg itself is not separating. Fraternal twins happen when 2 eggs are present and then are fertilized by 2 different sperm. So at no point does the egg just continue on dividing into what the creature is supposed to be. Unless, of course, sometimes this can happen. We've seen it with lizards. I think it's called abiogenesis, if I'm remembering correctly. That's just off the top of my head. but essentially it's animals not forming from fertilization, so it can happen. However, what we see with a simple egg crack is that the egg has been pushed to continue dividing. This process has caused the egg to begin taking on a structure and some embryonic growth. This process would indicate that the embryo has half of the genetic coding it needs and would even need to be viable, but it does also show mitosis is being pushed to start. So how is this possible? Well, it appears to me that within this sphere of influence, there is energy that is permeating the fabric of reality. This energy in some ways affects the human brain on a neurological level, and this would cause people to hear and smell things that they haven't in a while, as well as trigger memories. And I think I know why, but we'll explain this later. But this excitatory involvement of the neurons is just a symptom. With a cell that is not a neuron, the same energy can trigger the cell to begin dividing by specifically damaging the DNA of the cell, which in turn will disrupt the natural functioning of the cyclin genes, more so cyclin B and cyclin-dependent kinases known as CDK1 and CDC2. This will cause the cell to undergo mitosis rapidly in what we would consider to almost be a cancerous level. With the egg, these genes show that they are heavily affected as the egg moves past its arrested phase and is forced to divide. Because of this, we can assume everyone there is dealing with the same issue. Cancer would begin to be spreading in their bodies, which means they likely will not be surviving very long, but neurological activity would also be increased, leading to perception of smells and sounds, but also there is another side to this. This is more of an ethereal idea I have based on the actual functioning of the universe, but it is sort of out there, so I'll kind of hold off until later to talk about that. Nick then tells them to put up the alpacas by 10 p.m. as he leaves to take Teresa to the hospital. The next day, Benny blazes it while walking the alpacas. Jack is awoken by the tinnitus noise, same, with evidently nobody having to go to school or do anything of the sort. Benny then waters the alpacas as Miss Bedrot retiree comes out drinking what I am assuming is coffee. She needs it at her age, or maybe not. The alpacas are eating, as this is a problem allegedly, no idea why. They're grazing animals. They eat. So Benny then calls his sister a hairy axe wound, sibling love, as Jack is just sort of sitting out by the well whistling. Jack says it's talking to him. Miss Bedrot asks who, as he says the man in the well. So ignoring that, Bedrot then gets up, but her posture sucks, so she hears the tinnitus as well. So the man in the well, I think, is most definitely an indication that this thing does have a physical form. It's just imperceptible in the present. But in your past, you will have memories of it, and in your future, you will see it. We will see one more indicator of this before we really explain the actual creature or how it is possible, mainly because it gets a little out there, but I assure you it is fun for the brain. Or fun for your Brian, as I have written several times for some reason. So running inside, she continues to hear it as her phone then starts ringing. It's her dad, but all she hears is static when she picks up and yelling on the other end. But actually he's talking calmly and then the phone shuts off. Another indicator that the energy that surrounds the creature is actually affecting radio signals being sent. Jack is outside just sort of vibing all over as growths can be seen that are not appearing to be native to this planet. Another case could be made that it actually is naturally occurring, but the plants that are growing are suffering from genetic damage caused by the energy flowing around them, although it also could be that this creature is completely changing their cellular makeup. And this has caused the plants to begin springing forth with flowers much earlier than intended and even change their coloring. So approaching the well, Jack then looks down as he sees something down there. It opens and sees that Jack is above, as then a mantis creature sort of just flies off, which cannot be good for the ecosystem. As the TV starts freaking out, Bedrot then goes to clean the kitchen area with blood everywhere. Looking at the blood knife for like a really long time, I mean, it's just a bit of blood, which actually, I have a theory on that that's not even related to anything at all in this movie. Have you ever noticed that like some people can see blood and have no issues while others pass out almost immediately? I believe this is like a delegation of sorts. So having done EMT school and third riders, I did see a lot of blood and got blood on me. To me, it's never really been an issue to kind of, exist around it. Or for that matter, any bodily fluid. Like, don't get me wrong, I could be grossed out, but it's not like gonna put me down. I can also deal with like needles and getting my own blood drawn. And there are many out there who are like this, but there also is another side to it. There are those that if it's their own blood, they pass out immediately, but are fine seeing other people's blood. And then there are those that if they see any blood, they pass out. Obviously, the mechanism is due to the fact that if you are bleeding when you pass out, your blood pressure drops tremendously. As a result, the circulatory system is under less pressure, and as a result of that, your blood has a better chance of clotting. This mechanism seems pretty great, right? So why does everyone not pass out? I'm not sure if it's a social mechanism or a biological one, but there are those who have no issues. Typically, you'll find those who don't have this issue kind of thrive in hospital environments and as first responders. There's a bit of a hero complex as well in those who don't have this issue. And now clearly this is not across the board, but it's interesting how just the ability to not pass out seeing blood opens up job avenues that a lot of people end up in because they are not grossed out. Clearly in caveman times, not passing out would have been just as valuable as passing out, as those who can help would be able to help those who couldn't help themselves. I'm sure potentially those who do pass out may deal with other things better than those who don't pass out, though I'm not really sure what that would be. That had nothing to do with the movie, I just thought it was an interesting kind of anecdotal thing, so moving on. So out of nowhere, the pink light appears as something comes out of the faucet. Hours have passed as Bedrot realizes the sink is now overflowing. That's a lot of blood for that small of a wound. She then hears a call again as it's just Nick Cage allegedly yelling at her as her stomach starts hurting, and she goes up and hurls, getting her hair in the toilet, which that's a total bummer. So here we see another example of neurological activity being impacted. The creature is in the room with her, which as it gets closer, it's kind of like getting closer to the elephant's foot in Chernobyl. You will be exposed to more of this energy, which is not great. This can cause you to lose track of time, which is actually easier than you might think. The brain is almost a master of keeping track of time typically. There's no one particular spot associated with timekeeping in its entirety, and instead, it's spread across several areas of the brain through a complex system of neurons located in like the frontal cortex, the basal ganglia, and the cerebellum. Most of the key components are in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and when this creature is near, it's clear neurological function is disrupted, and this may be due to a seizure-like state being entered due to the excitation of the neurons. Typically, these would be known as a petit mal seizure, which is characterized by someone sort of like zoning out briefly and then resuming with almost no recollection that they had just checked out. And it's brief enough that you may not even notice the time change. However, with this creature, as it stands nearer, this causes neurons to begin firing, which in turn doesn't stop for quite some time, leading to hours being lost for that individual, which would allow for them to understand the passage of time being a bit concerning. Interestingly, it's known younglings can actually experience these more than adults, which may put it in line with Bedrot, Benny, and Jack all experiencing this petit mal seizure. Now, it should be known, not all zoning out is considered to be a seizure. We all do it. Also, everyone gets one free seizure in life. Just because you have one doesn't mean there is some massive issue. You could have just been low blood sugar, but you should still go to the hospital to get it checked out. But if you do have another seizure, you definitely need to go to a specialist. So hearing a knock at the door, Ward is out there. Bedrot looks pretty sick as he then tells her not to drink the water, which too late for that. She tells him that she believes him that the water is messed up, as then she goes and throws up again. As he turns to leave, he sees Jack just sort of standing there. Yeah, I'd just be leaving. He then asks what he's up to as Jack says he's playing with his friends. Alright then, so good luck with that, but we finally can talk about my crackpot theory that I have, and it's all based on human perception of time and physical reality. Basically, we suck at it for the most part. Strap in because here we go. To understand this creature, you need to understand how the fabric of reality is structured and with it dimensions. Take the first dimension for instance. It's just a line. There is no height to it, there's no width, depending on, I guess, on how you look at it. It's just one line, or at least one point. It's a bit hard to understand and conceptualize, but you sort of get it. The second dimension is length times width. And depending on which way you turn it, I guess it could be height. So here we begin to understand that it has a bit more structure. Anything existing at this level would not see in the third dimension, but would see the face of something on that plane of existence, and that's it. There would be no depth to it. For instance, let's say a two-dimensional creature was looking at you, it could see you, but it couldn't see your depth. The third dimension is what we perceive, length, width, and height. Our entire understanding of the physical world is this. If something from the second dimension were to try to perceive us at our third dimension, all they would see is you just straight on and incredibly flat. If you turned, they would see that plane just incredibly flat as well. There would be no third dimension to perceive because they wouldn't be able to perceive it. And this is where we start treading into human understanding of time. Time is the fourth dimension. While we are aware of its passing, you can quite literally see the limitations of the second dimension displayed in the third dimension for us. Just like the second dimension can only see the third dimension as a flat and exact point, we see time the exact same way. We only exist in the present as far as we can perceive. However, the reality is much like how if there was an entire depth missed by the second dimension when dealing with a third dimension, it's likely as a third dimensional creature, we miss the depth of the fourth dimension. And so we can never really truly perceive it, but we know it's there. That is why we are essentially stuck in the present, which is pretty interesting, right? So then how does this work with the fourth dimension? You can kind of think of the fourth dimension as a depth of time, spanning our entire existence and the existence of the universe. Snapshots if every existence was like stacked next to each other. Let's say you're in a three-dimensional room, right, with an expression of the fourth dimension. And let's say 100 seconds passes and you are in the middle of it, and each room gets 1 second of time. You are in room 51. Preceding you are 50 rooms that you can still access, which would be back in time by our perception, and before you are 49 rooms, which are the future as far as you're concerned. To a being who is extra-dimensional, these rooms are all available for it to move through at any point it wishes, and because it exists at a higher dimensional plane, it is able to do this. Humanity, however, due to the limitations that our meat suits have, cannot perceive these other rooms. So to us, it seems like we are in one room all the time, but we are actually being forcibly moved forward through time, but we do not perceive this movement. So simultaneously, while we understand the passage of time because we get older and we have ways to measure it, we do not perceive it like someone else who can actually see time and move through it might. So as a result, when this creature is near us, we also cannot fully perceive it. Instead, we see the color it has surrounding it, much like how a two-dimensional creature may not fully perceive a three-dimensional form, as a three-dimensional creature cannot fully perceive a four-dimensional form. We can, however, see the dimensional form that exists in the three-dimensional space, much like how our three-dimensional form has length, width, and height, which a two-dimensional creature would not be able to see, or at least it'll be able to see length and height. It would not be able to see depth. So then how is Jack seeing his friends playing? It's not so much that he is playing, but he has memories of playing. As he stands there in the present, there is nothing to perceive. In the past, however, it may be that a fourth dimensional form is able to be perceived somewhat. You gotta think of it like the Langoliers in Stephen King's book. I think it's called the Langoliers. Stephen King's book. A group of people get stuck in the past, which becomes their present, where creatures eat the past to erase it. Being stuck there has put them in a room and breached the very edge of human understanding when it comes to perception. As a result, back to this movie, Jack remembers playing with his friends maybe even a millisecond prior, but in the present, he's doing nothing apart from existing alone. This brings into question, does our past self become extra-dimensional once that moment passes, and as a result, it will forever exist? And does our future self have the same ability, but our current self is overwhelmed with the perception of the here and now and is inundated with so much information that that is all we can process? It's really hard to tell. And this is why really death may not matter in the long run, because if we exist and have always existed and will always exist to a degree, then the only thing that really moves on is our present form, which then puts us outside of human perception for those that are still perceiving it. Like, you're sitting here listening to me, right? What do you think yourself was doing 1 second ago? Does that still exist at some point in time, or is it just gone forever? It's a hell of a mental thought experiment, but it's interesting as ultimately we are so limited by our brains that we may never truly know until we move on. But ultimately, I believe that's how this creature operates. In a fourth dimension existing before and after, just outside of human perception of the present, its physical form can be seen in terms that we understand, but its full magnitude of what it is can never be grasped because it is at a higher dimensional plane. So walking off into the woods, he passes by Ezra's as he opens up the door and it's unlocked. And I mean, it's the shack of a squatter. Why is there even a lock there in the first place? Ezra is on the ground listening as he says he's reorganizing. Ward then says he found something in the water. He asks where Professor Furface is, as he says he hasn't seen her since it all started. He goes on to claim that you can hear them down there, some real Cheech and Chong go to Arkham type of deal. Listening in, Ward doesn't hear anything as Chong then says people are under the floor, as what he's listening to is kind of grasping all of his attention, or grabbing all his attention. So Chong is speaking straight up nonsense, very clear, thanks for clarifying. So later that night, the parents have been gone for like 36 hours, which is crazy. Nick then sings opera on the way home like a proper psycho as they drive along. Teresa talks about work as something appears in the road. Professor Furface actually, and it has no fur. Teresa freaks out and then calls the younglings as Nick says they are fine. I don't know about that one, brother. Jack is sitting outside with Sam as hilariously, my girlfriend, she's like, well, at least the dog is smart enough and then survives. As in this thing, like it's not funny that the dog gets taken out, but almost immediately after she says that, the dog is taken out. So the timing was atrocious. Bedrod is tweaking inside over the tinnitus sound as then she heads into Benny's room. Seeing something on the screen, it's pulsating like a heartbeat, as in the screen fades out and the buzzing stops. Samsung product placement. Benny then says he was just out in the backfield and he got lost out there. Suprachiasmatic area clearly affected. It was daytime and then all of a sudden it was night and he couldn't find the house. Hearing the phone ring, they then run down where they talk to their dad as they hear garbled voices. Their phone then rings again as the light flickers. Wondering where Jack is, the parents then pull up, finding him standing out there like a total creepazoid. The parents are pissed as Nick then says, while the cats are away, the mice will play. Good God. Anyway, so Bedrot then accuses Nick of yelling at her. The alpacas are still out as Nick then breaks out this insane accent. It's absolutely, also, look at the hand movements. What is this? So Nick then goes to put the coveted alpacas back up, as then he calls out to Sam, but he's nowhere to be found. Bedrot then says their dad is acting weird. What is the baseline level of acting for Nick Cage? Not sure. So then he's like, oh, you know what? Bedrot, get out of my sight. Actually, never mind. I'll get out of yours. It's like, why do you say it that way? So back at the house, Nick comes in jerkily taking off his jacket as then he goes to take a shower, which this is the worst tile work I've ever seen. Also, who gets into a shower without turning it on first? His arm is bothering him as he finds hair in the drain. This episode sponsored by Keep. He then picks up something in the drain as it attaches to his arm as he drops it and waffle stomps the monster down the drain. I mean, who hasn't done that before? Jack then says Sam was growling and then asks if he's with Grandpa in heaven. Nick starts talking about the smell once more. It's exactly the same smell from the cancer ward, as then he pulls out some weird accent again, saying Teresa knows more than anyone about the cancer smell. This is another example of existing across all time periods, as it is able to clearly traverse them. The creature exists in the same time frame as when Nick was dealing with his dad in the cancer ward. As a result, he's now having those memories triggered as the creature is there. It's like Jack playing with the creature as well. While he's not doing anything at this particular point in time, he's just, as far as he knows, in no way dealing with it. However, the creature is around him, which is triggering this neurological activity. Also, saying that to your wife who has cancer, that is a hell of a strategy. Nobody chooses that. So as the mushroom spore is released, this is clearly influencing everyone. Nick goes and checks his tomato plants, finding out they've grown way faster than originally they were supposed to be, as his arm has some sort of rash on it, with the giant mantis seen earlier. Heading inside to clean the tomatoes, he then goes to take a bite out of the heirloom, I guess. And Teresa's having issues with the internet and her job in general. The calls keep getting dropped as she heads downstairs and says that she's hemorrhaging clients. He starts biting into those tomatoes like a total weirdo as he hates all of them and then slam dunks them into the trash. She tells him to fix the dish as he says he thinks that's a good idea, sweetie, as instead he just goes and drinks with contaminated ice cubes. Turning on the TV, the mayor is talking about infrastructure projects, but also how fish are dying in droves. Nick's arm is in rough shape, indicating mass cell death, as very likely there is forced mitosis around the dermis area. And this is what we like to call dermatitis. Well, at least that's inflammation. Putting some bourbon on it for some reason, that should solve all of it. The TV then starts turning colors as some sort of weird amalgamation sculpture is shown. That night, as everyone then goes to bed, Jack gets up to go outside because he's a huge dork. Heading downstairs, the TV is flickering and his old man is passed out in front of it. Trying to wake him up, he doesn't get up, but instead, something can be seen on the TV. Benny is already outside, blue stealing it as Jack then comes out. Looking out, the entire landscape looks rather alien. Miss Bedrot is doing another ritual and burning sage as she calls out for help. She pulls out a razor blade and then starts slicing into her skin. Yeah, okay then. I think you're sort of getting lost in the sauce there, gal. Looking at the alpaca barn, they then hear something as Teresa wakes up looking for Jack. Bedrot keeps cutting herself, which is... This is why it's important to keep your offspring out of the occult nonsense. Jack and Benny then head to the barn as Teresa finds them heading that way, but Benny can't hear her for some reason. Entering the barn, the alpacas are going absolutely ham. Shining a light on them, they're all one giant congealed mass and emitting some sort of extra-dimensional spores, seeing as it's the same imperceptible coloring, but in our third-dimensional eyes, some of it's able to be seen. The light then starts building up as Benny and Jack make a run for it. Benny heroically leaves his brother behind as Teresa goes to grab Jack, as then they get hit with the light. Benny watches as Nick then comes outside. Hearing moaning, they approach Jack and Teresa, or as I like to call them, Jerisa. They have been fused together in a horrific amalgamation. Benny then calls 911, but Benny can't get a dial tone. Bedrot then comes downstairs, having cut herself up, as then she spots, surprisingly, she's not the center of attention, because there's something more horrific going on, as Jack and Teresa have been straight up combined. Nick then heads out and starts beating up the car because it won't start. I mean, truth be told, it's just fuel compression and electricity. The starter is moving, so the battery isn't dead. Maybe check a wire. So then he looks out at the landscape and sees how saturated it is in general. His arms are also having a massive amount of dead skin appear on them, and then heading inside, Bedrot is next to Jerisa as Benny sits there depressed. Jack portion of Jerisa is absolutely getting suffocated into the pillow as Bedrot suggests the thing from the meteor changed everything. Time stretches around the meteor as well, and they don't know how long they've even been sitting there or how long Nick has been out at the car. Jerisa then starts screeching as they realize the light is burning them. Nick says the car is not happening. Well, you got a good pair of walking legs underneath y'all, right? Start walking. He also says something sucked the charge out of the car, which not really. I mean, it was running the starter quite well. Nick then asks why they keep making that sound, probably because they're fused together. So then they shut the curtains as they bring Jerisa up to her office. Laying her down on the gross bed, the color out of space is inside them. Jack can sort of talk, but realistically, they're having extreme issues. Bedrot gets the tinnitus as Benny then says this is the same thing that happened to the alpacas. Nick claims everything is under control as he leaves the room. So here's the clearest example I can point to show indirectly how cellular mitosis is being affected, but dimensionally being directly affected is, I think, more horrific. As we will see later, growth continues to take place, much like with the alpacas, but what you can think of with why they are 2 points becoming one, two things shouldn't be able to exist together at the same point in time and the same point in place. However, this creature can clearly combine things through fourth dimensional manipulation. As a result, Jack and Teresa are not just fused physically, but due to the manipulation of time, they are fused forever. Their entire past, they were fused. Their entire future, they were fused. And because it's at one present point in time, that is also their past. Their timelines were physically fused together as well, creating this conglomeration. So it's not just a physical thing, it's also involving time, which is absolutely horrific. That is how this creature operates. It appears to fuse points in time. And if you happen to be there with someone else, it can fuse you together, and this would also have an impact on the three-dimensional plane as well. So grabbing the old force multiplier, he then starts saying whatever it is going to leave his family alone. Brother, you are inside of this thing that is affecting your family. The best you can do is leave the immediate area. So heading to the alpaca barn, he sees his prized possessions are fused into one giant alpaca. This indicates this creature is not doing it to be evil or targeting the family, it's just its nature. Same concept as a fish has got to swim and a bird's got to eat. This creature, for one reason or another, fuses fourth dimensional time points if three-dimensional beings happen to be there and are detected. Now, why this is the case, I am sure none of us will ever really understand, as it doesn't seem predatory or for really any purpose. Of course, this conglomeration results in something else to exist, so it may be that it can inhabit three-dimensional beings if they are large enough. Seeing this, Nick then starts doming them, taking them out. Giving Jerisa some water, she then drinks it like a dog for reasons unknown, which perhaps maybe it's like she's also been fused with the remnants of the dog from the past as well, considering we know he was taken out by the creature. Bedrot then says they need to get off this farm tonight. Agreed. Nick then comes in his usual attire, covered in blood, as he tells him to go downstairs. Bedrot then asks what he's going to do, as he claims he will handle it. Sure. He then tells him to get out. I mean, it's a mercy thing at this point. Putting the force multiplier to her head, she starts freaking out, but then he stops, saying he's going to fix this. Brother, how? You are dealing with an ethereal genetic blender at this point. Back in town, Ward then goes to talk to the mayor about why she's a turd in the punch bowl about all this, and heading back to the goated Land Cruiser, he's then called over by the sheriff as they pull back the cover and show an animal combined with several others. They found them bunched up together. What do you call it, like a rat king? They appear to have radiation burns as their skin is gone, and they have no idea what to make of it, but he spots Professor Furface's collar in there. Back at the funny farm, Nick then sits down to watch the alien TV as Bedrot tries to get on the horse to get out of there. The plan is for the two of them just to ride out of there, but the color is already in the horse's eye as well, so it is infected. Benny enters the farm, avoiding the alpaca pile, as the horse then starts freaking out. Grabbing the harness, Benny scares Bedrot, as the horse then keeps freaking out and then takes off. Okay, so again, you guys have a great pair of walking legs, start walking. Benny doesn't want to do it though, as it's in the dark and for 12 miles. You can literally walk at 3 miles per hour. You could break out in a jog at 5 miles per hour. So you're telling me you can't run for like 2 hours and maybe just walk for 4? Hearing howling in the well, Benny then runs over like a complete idiot, but he's not done yet. Looking down, he spots something saying Sam is hurt. Brother, you didn't see anything. He says he will put him in the bucket and then Bedrot can just kind of pull him up. Dude, that bucket is tiny. That's not pulling anybody up. Descending into the Well of Wonders, he says it smells like something died. Yeah, you. Looking down, the light then starts turning on once more as he realizes he's an absolute brainlet. Attempting to climb up, this was totally your fault, Benny. He puts on his glasses to see what it is as tentacles grab him and then pull him down. Nick then grabs Bedrot, his last remaining surviving offspring, as Nick then comes back to saying he's not a monster. She doesn't want to go see her mother, so he pushes Bedrot into the room with the mom, as then he says to feed her mother, which... okay. Meanwhile, Ward and the sheriff are on their way back. The horse goes running by as the sheriff turns on his lights and sirens and then picks up the pace. Nick has another drink and then sits down, except he poured another one and gives it to someone who isn't even there. I would say he's straight up hallucinating, but it's very likely he is dealing with people from his past that are in the room with him, but we can't perceive it. So up in the family fun room, Bedrot then turns around seeing Jerisa has turned into something horrific, and it can still talk. The sheriff now arrives with zero backup except for the water authority here, and as they go and knock on the door, Nick answers as clearly he's having some issues. Nick tells them that they have been having a hard time as Bedrot is getting straight up almost eaten by Jerisa, except it's taking forever. Interestingly, I believe this creature is a projection of this creature, just fully three-dimensional. It is clearly inhabiting Jerisa as it will inhabit others, such as the horse with its coloring. While we do not know exactly what it looks like, this three-dimensional version looks absolutely horrific, possibly showing at least somewhat what it appears to be. So they ask what happened to Nick's arms as he's like, oh, it's just a rash. And then they're like, okay, well, where are your family? And then he points to an empty room saying, well, they're right here. Ward then hears Bedrot screaming as the sheriff bursts open the door, seeing Jerisa, as this thing has almost been eating her for like 12 years. Nick comes in and takes a shot which takes out the Teresa portion before taking out the Jack portion of Jerisa. I don't know why that is a massive tongue twister. He then says they aren't my family as then he leaves. Grabbing Bedrot, he says he's going to carry her out into the patrol car. Heading outside, the well starts freaking out once more. That can't be good. As Nick then takes aim at the well, the sheriff misidentifies this and then fires a shot at Nick, thinking he was trying to take out Ward. Well, welcome to the wonderful world of on your own, Bedrot. Nick then looks at his blood, saying it's beautiful, as Ward then looks at the sheriff. Nick flatlines out as the sheriff says they need to get out of there. Bedrot says they can't escape, which I disagree, you do have legs. They hear a noise as the sheriff asks what that was, as Ward says it's Ezra. Bedrot elects to stay behind as she says she lives there, and heading into the mystical forest of flesh monsters, they hear something talking. Approaching Ezra's shack, it appears distorted. Opening the door, they find Ezra is gone and the life has been sucked out of him as they are hearing a recording of him. Years of smoking the ganj has finally caught up to him. The thing is changing the world into what it is. The color is in its body, its skin is desiccated as cameras start going off as the color burns. They then start running as the sheriff gets picked up by something immediately. Looking up, Ward then spots him being stabbed in the head by a tree, which they're in the trees because they are the trees, and running back to the farm, Bedrot is standing in front of the well. Ward then turns her around as she has been infected by the color, with her irises glowing. He then sees its world, which I assume means that she has been completely infected, now he's being infected. Anyways, it's a bunch of worms gathering around a center pillar with a sun that appears to be going near supernova. The worms are on Earth also as the color emerges from the well and then heads up towards the sky in a giant pink tornado. Bedrot gets almost immediately shredded as Ward's own physical being starts warping. Time to run, brother. Heading inside, he sees Nick sitting there, even though he should be dead, but he's been infected as well, as Ward informs him that he is dead and the rest of the family also just randomly appears. There appears to actually be some sort of bleed over in these hallucinations, as if you get close enough, maybe memories can be transferred. So Nick then attacks Ward as they get into a good old-fashioned close quarter fight, and Ward opens up the wine cellar as then he heads below to hide. As he does, the lights continue to build up and then flashes out. Having what appears like my vision with migraines, he then wakes up. So everyone is desiccated with just skeletons left. Emerging, truly the color is out of space. Looking around, he's in the blast site with the rest of the forest still there, but this particular spot is completely desaturated. It has gone white and black as Ward says he hopes the water that covers this place will be deep, but even then he won't drink it. Evidently some time has passed as now he has a beard and it's graying somewhat, with the dam being mentioned earlier having already been built. He claims only a few remember the strange days now. He says it was just the color out of space. The brain can't comprehend it. As he throws the cigarette into the water, the sky is a pinkish color and the mantis from earlier is still flying by, and thus concludes the color out of space. So what was the deal with the coloring being taken away? It's clear that this creature existed within this area. It could permeate all cells. The longer you were influenced, the more this creature's own makeup would become the individual's makeup. Eventually, it appears the naturally occurring cells would be overtaken by this creature's cells. The coloring that they had was simply because of the coloring of the creature and what it had, at least its perceptible part. When the creature left, the coloring left with it, leaving behind only ash. What was left of the original creature and plants was pretty much gone prior, and it just wasn't noticed by the family or anyone else because it was sort of like, you could probably like painting over a stain, right? The stain is still there, you just painted over it. This creature may operate even higher than the fourth dimension actually, with the fifth dimension coming into play, which is actually entanglement of space-time fabric. We can surmise with at least somewhat accuracy that the fourth dimension with the aforementioned rooms next to each other is likely at play here, and this is being around like typically that the creature is going to operate in quite regularly. Its ability to manipulate events likely indicates it again is able to exist in the fifth dimension. And all in all though, what a ride. I absolutely loved it. Considering this is a Nick Cage movie, I mean, you know, the writer, H.P. Lovecraft, is pretty good, I hear. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I also want to hear what you think. Do you think this was a time manipulating creature, or do you think it was something else? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be great of you, as it helps get the video out there, and subscribing is also pretty cool as well. I'll throw my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and games link in the description. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First of all, I thank our astronauts, Army and Tristan Kessick. Thank you guys for your awesome support. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicists, Death Dancer and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And to my scientists, Dakota 23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, Official Texan, Stutz, and the victorious return of Chad the Enjoyer of Scientific Explanations of B-grade horror movies. I do appreciate you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, thank you guys. It's never expected for you to help, but it is definitely appreciated as it helps keep everything running smoothly, so you guys are ballers. All right, so that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.